Hey everybody again, my name's Dave, CTO at Nitobi, work on PhoneGap a lot, and I'm going to be talking about PhoneGap plugins. Yeah, and then actually some other people after me from Chariot Solutions are going to come up and show you an implementation of NFC plugin, which is pretty cool. So plugins is a big part of PhoneGap 1.0, and we did our best to standardize it across all the platforms, and it essentially just enables you to add custom native functionality to PhoneGap and expose that native functionality to JavaScript in the web view. Yeah, overall that's how it is. Right now, all the core APIs in PhoneGap even, so like geolocation, accelerometer, all that stuff, right? All the normal PhoneGap APIs that we use, those are actually written as plugins like today in 1.0. So conceivably in the future, those will even be pulled out of what PhoneGap really is, and just you'll choose, oh, I want geolocation, I want accelerometer, I want Facebook plugin, and those will just get put into your application, and only that code will be in your app. So that's sort of the goal of plugins, and this 1.0 is one big step towards that, in that now we do have this extensibility mechanism built into PhoneGap right from the ground up on all the platforms. I mean, when I say on all the platforms too, like Symbian and WebOS, because they're JavaScript, the plugin architecture there is a bit more fluid, just because everything's JavaScript anyway. You have less options. WebWorks is sort of somewhere in between, because we actually use some of the BlackBerry WebWorks JavaScript APIs for plugins, and then go into native in other cases. And then, of course, iOS and Android mostly just go straight from JavaScript into native. So one thing that this is hopefully going to be like a big announcement, and I'm totally understating it, I think. But anyway, so Facebook is working with us to build the Facebook plugin for PhoneGap. Yeah! Woo! Yeah, so they were going to have somebody here, but apparently they're busy with other stuff. I don't know. They do anything? Yeah, so they are working with us to actually integrate into their Connect API. So the JavaScript API that you use for Facebook, like on your web applications and stuff for doing Facebook single sign-on and all that sort of junk, is all the source code is located here. It's all open source. And so we're working with the Facebook engineer, and they're actually putting in some code into this so that you can pass in a PhoneGap implementation. So when you can take your Facebook code written in JavaScript for a web application, put it into PhoneGap, and it will actually use the native application for doing single sign-on, the native Facebook app on the phone for doing the single sign-on. So currently, people always use child browser, and they bring it up and they do the OAuth thing, jump through all those hoops. But now with this plugin, it will just go from your application. It will launch the single sign-on app that's installed on your phone. On most phones, like 70% of iPhones and Androids, I think, have the Facebook app, or 80% or something. It's crazy. So then it'll go to that native app, and then it will do that, and then go back to your app, and you are magically signed into Facebook, and you can do all the Facebook Graph API calls, standard Facebook JavaScript stuff. So it's super cool. The initial plugin is located there. If you want, you can go check it out right now even. And I'll do a demo of it. And we'll actually look through the code, and so we can see actually how you write a plugin on both iOS and Android. Okay, so I think that's all for slides. And so, okay, anyone know the hotkey for increasing font size on this guy? Yeah, in Xcode? Huh? Oh, well, anyway, I'll do this. All right, so here's a basic PhoneGap application, right? Got your www, all this sort of stuff. Facebook JS SDK, so this is actually the built version of the Facebook GitHub JavaScript with our changes in it that are eventually going to be committed to that GitHub repo. And we just have like a basic index HTML, have some buttons for logging in, telling you about yourself, or actually me, I think, does a Facebook Graph API call. So down here, so this is just like standard Facebook JavaScript API stuff, and it's going to return my friends. And then, of course, I hook up to all the standard Facebook events. So all these things just actually work, and it's this very, very thin layer going from the JavaScript into native code. So right now this is actually working on RC1, but it works for real other places too. And then, of course, as all good PhoneGap developers do, we put all our scripts and everything down at the bottom of the body. So we got our PhoneGap.js, we got our plugin, our PhoneGap Facebook Connect plugin, and we got our Facebook JS SDK, and then all of our app code essentially here. So if we actually look at what the plugin looks like on the JavaScript side. So when you're writing a plugin, it's more or less a matter of calling this function here, PhoneGap.exec. And so what PhoneGap.exec is the wrapper call that you make from JavaScript to get into native code on all the different platforms. On all the different platforms, what's actually inside that function is totally different because we do the communication in different ways. Sure. Who's doing that? So like on iOS, for example, we communicate with native by setting a message in the URL, in the query string. And we capture that on the native side, and we do some stuff, and then we call back into JavaScript. On Android, we override the JavaScript prompt method. Thank you, Bryce. Super hacky, but it's the only way to do it properly and not causing stuff to crash on certain versions of Android. The emulator. The emulator in particular. So PhoneGap.exec takes 3 arguments. This is probably a pretty bad one because it has null and null. But anyway, so this is super simple though, right? It's like, how many lines is this? I don't know. 30 lines of JavaScript for this whole Facebook Connect plugin. So we'll look at login. Takes a function here. So this is your success function callback. And then we just call into the Facebook code here and call a callback. Null is our failure callback. So every call to exec takes a success and failure. And then this right here is, it should actually be something like this. I'm going to change it right now. So it should actually be Facebook Connect and then login. So this is actually Facebook Connect. That's the name of our plugin. It's like a friendly name. You can do whatever the heck you want there for the name. And then this is the action that you want to do in your native code. And we'll get to that in a second. And then you can pass in some arguments as well. So I'm actually just going to undo that because that's obviously going to break things. When we're actually installing the plugins into our application, in PhoneGap 1.0, we have a new, where am I going here? Supporting files. We have a new section in the PhoneGap plist file called plugins. So if you create a plugin or if you install a plugin, you need to go and edit this plugin section of the PhoneGap plist file on iOS. And this essentially just does a mapping of that string that I just showed you, the friendly name of your plugin, to an actual class on the native side. So we actually, when these PhoneGap exec calls are made, we look up this mapping from the PhoneGap plist or from a plugins XML file on Android and BlackBerry. And then we say, oh, is there a plugin that has this name that's passed in? If so, then we can essentially use reflection to load the class and call the execute method on it, which we'll see in a moment. So in this case, we have Facebook Connect plugin is our actual iOS Objective-C class that we're mapping to on the native side. So that's like the big change actually for 1.0 essentially with plugins. And this is good from a few standpoints, not the least of which is, let's see here, PhoneGap. So before, we did a whole bunch of weird stuff for plugins from JavaScript. And we essentially allowed people to load plugins by writing their own JavaScript code. So I'm going to check one of these. I haven't actually checked this one, but I think, yeah, so we did this stuff here before. So we did PhoneGap add constructor, PhoneGap.add plugin, plugin manager.add service. So all of that cruft is gone now. Yay! And everyone rejoiced. So anyway, so that was all like weird random stuff, and anybody could just get some JavaScript somehow into your application, and they could call these functions, add a plugin like, I don't know, add steel contacts and send them to foobar.com, and then they could run that. So we've gotten rid of all that crap, and so the only way that you can connect from JavaScript into native is by setting mappings in your plist or your plugins.xml file. So we really like that, and it's pretty important, I think. Okay, and that's the one. Okay, so you do that there. in your plist. Okay, and then we look in our plugins folder, and you can see here we've got Facebook plugin. We got our connect plugin.h. It inherits from the PG plugin class. That's essentially the only interesting thing about this. And then inside of our actual implementation of this, we have a few things. So we have handle open URL. So there's a few special methods that you can define, like handle open URL that you get from the PG plugin class. That essentially, on iOS, of course, your app has a handle open URL thing, and this is actually how we go do callbacks essentially from the Facebook application, because it says, okay, call back into the application that just opened me, and then we do a pass-through from the PhoneGap shell application into all of the plugins. So every plugin can have a handle open URL, and then it can decide inside your plugin if it's interested in that handle open URL call. So in this case, we do this check to see handle open URL, and if that's okay, then we do our stuff for setting the session and all that sort of thing in the Facebook Connect plugin. We also have some other important bits around the plugin architecture. We have the idea of a plugin result, so you can essentially pass in a status, command OK, and this sort of thing just wraps up a whole bunch of stuff for generating JSON messages to pass back across to JavaScript. So you can get your messages back into JavaScript nicely, and it prevents you from actually wanting to write JavaScript inside of Objective-C code, which is generally not a very good idea. So like we're doing right here. And this is actually a hack to get around, I forget which bug it was, but I think this one should be gone now. So some other things, you have an init, get login status, and all of these things are actually just handled. So like this login right here, that method name essentially maps that string, or the action as we call them, in the JavaScript file. And the plugin architecture in PhoneGap actually manages mapping from that action that you specify in your JavaScript to call this method. And so you don't have to worry about any of that. It just magically happens for you. It's on a different thread and so on and so forth. And you can just return plugin results from these, and that's essentially all you need to do. You can also call write JavaScript, which is a little bit of sugar, just so you can have that flexibility to do some other stuff if you really want to. And there's a whole bunch of other methods in here. So for logout, all standard stuff. Go check it out on GitHub. And let's just, yeah, so here's the actual, my beautiful, beautiful app. I'm very proud of it. So init, so Facebook just has this init thing anyhow. I'm going to go log in. So in this case, because it's in the simulator, it's going to go out to Safari because you can't have the Facebook app installed, or I don't have it installed. So anyway, I've already said give it access to this app. So these are just the regular Facebook JavaScript events that are built into the Facebook JavaScript code. So auth status change, login, all that stuff just gets fired automatically. When I click on me, it goes and does that Facebook.api call. So you would use that exact same API call if you were using this in just a regular web app. And that call is actually just going and through their JavaScript and going out to the web. It's not even going through native or anything. So we only do essentially the login, logout, get login status. You can get the session, so just some info about your session key, and so on. Get your login status. Yeah, I'm logged in. We can log out. Okay. Again, all those same events get fired. Yeah, good stuff. And not logged in. Good. So that's what it looks like on iOS. And if we go and look at it on Android, have the same sort of thing. So I just have an app called Connect, and I have my Connect plugin. The JavaScript, finally, the JavaScript for these two is exactly the same. Can you imagine? That's ridiculous. So if we actually look in our JavaScript, this JavaScript, aside from the mapping here, which is sort of arbitrary and up to the plugin developer, and it was in flux because I'm on RC1 here, of course. But now Facebook Connect, as long as you're mapping in your plugins XML and your plugins plist, or your PhoneGap plist is the same, then this exact same JavaScript works on all the platforms, which is fucking fantastic. So if we look in the plugin for Android, again, we just extend com.phonegap.api.plugin. Android's slightly different in that we have one execute method that we call always, and we pass in our action and our arguments and our callback ID. So in this case, let's look at the login one again. When we have a login, no, actually, we just do some craft, create a plugin result again. We have that same idea of the plugin result here, and that's going to be used to actually, we return that down at the bottom. Somewhere way, way down here. Yeah, so we return our plugin result there, and that gets transformed into a JSON message that gets passed back to the web view. And then essentially if it's plugin result.status.ok, then your success callback gets called. If it's anything else, your failure callback gets called. There are a few other little bits, I guess, on both of the platforms, like, so for example, on geolocation for watch position, you have when we actually return a success callback, in the basic case, it actually deletes your function handler, your success handler, because it assumes you're done. So there's some other functions in here for being able to say, like, this is actually going to call my success callback more than once. And so I'll deal with deleting it later. So like in watch position for geolocation, you want to continually be calling back to your success handler with your updated position every time you have one. And I think I've even got, just to prove it to you guys here, PhoneGap, so like the geo broker. So like I said, all of our actual core APIs in PhoneGap extend, in this case on Android, they all extend plugin. They all extend PG plugin on iOS and same plugin on BlackBerry. And as I also mentioned on iOS, same is true on Android and BlackBerry in that the sort of plugin architecture, we have the idea of a plugin manager, which makes sure that your plugin runs on a separate thread from everything else, so you're not blocking your UI, and you're not doing any of that stuff, and we just take care of all of that for you. And I think I'll just run this one. Let's look on here. Okay. So just so you know, I wasn't like faking it on the other one. Okay, there, stop it. You got it. Go. Okay. Needs to go green. Okay, you're good, right? Yeah, okay. Right. So we can click on it again, just for fun. Log in. In this case, I actually have the Facebook app installed on my device. I've already given it access, so it comes here. Usually it would say, log in or whatever. You can define too. In this one, you can define, for the Facebook one in particular, you can define what permissions you want. So if you want emails or being able to post or so on and so forth, and that stuff all applies. We can click OK. It goes back, again, our auth status, login event, session change event. Same stuff happens. We can also access, takes a bit longer on here, I think, all of our friends on there. I'm obviously not very popular. Well, support at nitobi.com, actually. Okay, get login. Same stuff. Working on a device there. So that's pretty cool. And I think I will mention as well, in the res folder in your Android, in your Android PhoneGap app, there's an XML folder that has your plugin's XML file. And that's where we do the mapping from the friendly name to the actual implementation class. There will be probably more attributes such as like version number and things like that will be added to here eventually so that you can deal with dependencies and all that sort of junk, but that's definitely not happening today. And I think there's a couple other things I want to talk about, but at the moment that's pretty good. Does anybody have any questions about this or like any particular aspects of it that are unclear or that you would like to know more about? Yes. Yes, yeah, you do. So that's one thing so on iOS, you need to put it into your plist, and it's just like any any app essentially that integrates with the Facebook API or with the Facebook app on the phone needs to do the standard Facebook setup essentially, yeah. Yeah. Any other questions, or if there's any other comments about other cool stuff about the plugins that is interesting and people think others should know, then let me know. Hey? Yeah, I could show it. I just didn't want to bring up VMware actually. And that's the cool thing. Like a lot of the Java code for Android, it largely just works for the most part in BlackBerry as well. So like obviously there's a few different classes. Like we did one plugin for caching images from the web so that when you went offline you would still have access to these images, but they would be images that would update or there were too many of them or what have you. And I think there was like maybe in a couple hundred lines of our Java code doing all the network stuff and so on for downloading it and saving it to the file system, there was maybe 6 lines of code you had to change to do your Android versus your BlackBerry implementation. So that's actually really cool. And I mean, the actual PhoneGap Java code is pretty much exactly the same across both. So there's nothing you have to change there, but there may be just some particular APIs on BlackBerry versus Android that you would have to do custom. Cool.
So I've never used the plugin system before. I'm actually still quite new to PhoneGap. But in order to get a plugin to work, I saw your plugin set here.
Yeah.
Like, would I just take it, add it to plugins dash?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So if you were like about installing a plugin essentially, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So right now as it stands with 1.0, if you're just doing like a one-off on one platform, so on Android in this case, you know, the connect.java, that's essentially my app. So I've created a new Android app. I link in the PhoneGap jar. I put the PhoneGap.js into my asset/www folder, and then that's essentially installing PhoneGap. And then installing a plugin on top of that is essentially you would drop in this source file, drop in your assets www Facebook or PhoneGap Facebook Connect plugin, and change your plugins.xml file to add the mapping. And those sort of instructions on like how to do that are sort of it's on the onus of the plugin developer to say, you know, go and do this and that. So, you know, doing the mapping in plugins.xml of this Facebook Connect string to the actual class implementing it is up to them. But
And then for iOS, would just be an app.
yeah, same thing. You add the source code to your plugins folder, add the JavaScript file to your www, and then update the plist. Yeah, and then that's all you need to do. So in the future, certainly we're planning on, you know, making that easier and nicer through command line tools or, you know, there's lots of, like I mentioned, the dependency issue. That's a huge one. It's like, oh, does this plugin work on PhoneGap 1.0 or what version doesn't work on, that sort of stuff. Yeah, so good question though. Yeah.
Sound like over-regulated. Could this type of plug-in like Connect be used to access a remote database server?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. And like I say, you know, every single core API that we have right now is essentially a plugin. So there's nothing, you know, there's nothing different technologically speaking about the core APIs versus this Facebook plugin or like, you know, I wanted to make a Twilio plugin as soon as I get access to their private beta for their mobile stuff. You know, the Phono, I don't know if you guys have heard of that. They have this awesome plugin for iOS and Android that is essentially for doing telephony, like Twilio sort of stuff. And you can get access to that, and that's pretty cool. I didn't get it working actually for today, but I only had like 30 minutes. Yeah, so all those sort of things are like, you know, the sky's the limit in terms of the plugins, and as long as there's an API on the native side, then you can just write the little connector there and go from there. I mean, in terms of the JavaScript side and the PhoneGap exec method, I won't get into that, but you don't ever have to look into it really, and it should shield you from all the gory details of how the connection actually happens. A general purpose authentication? No, not at the moment. Not at the moment, no. That's interesting. Yeah. Sure, yeah. So I've actually got so here's like my PhoneGap Day sample app. To write a plugin, usually I would go and essentially just create a blank application. You want to go and, whoops, zoom out a bit here. Cancel that. Yeah, I mean, essentially you're just going to add your new Java class in this case. Call it my plugin. We're going to inherit from com.phonegap.api.plugin. Finish. It's already put in my execute method there. So coming into here, this is going to be your action coming from the PhoneGap.exec call. So it could be, I don't know, we do a common one of like a battery level. I won't get into the whole details, but then again, like I said, you want to return a new plugin result. And you would want to do plugin result.status.OK. And so that's going to call your success handler. There's a few options here. Whoa, hey, Ian. You guys didn't want to see that. Yeah, so there's a few options on your plugin result. You can pass in a message that you want to pass back, just some random data that you want to pass back, or what have you. But in this case, that will just do that. And then you would, actually, I will pass back a string there. And then inside your www, you would just create a new, create a new file. myplugin.js. And we just do var. We're just going to do an object literal. We're not going to be creating new instances of it or anything. So what did I call that one? Yeah, actually, it doesn't really matter actually what I call it right now, but I'll just say foobar. And then here I would just do phonegap.exec. Actually, I'll pass in a success handler here. Success, null. And so this is going to be whatever I want it to be, foobar. My action is going to be test, I guess. And my argument list, I have an empty argument list. So in here, I'm actually going to do if arg0 equals test, then I'm going to return that one. Otherwise, I'm going to return something else here. Okay, and then, so now we have the JavaScript side, have the Java side, and then we would just want to go into our plugins.xml and map those across. And I called it foobar, I think, right? And this is com.example dot my plugin. Okay, that'll look right? I think so. Cool. In my index.html, I'm just going to delete a whole bunch of junk here. And I'm going to put a button. And I'm going to do an on-click. And I'm going to do, let's see, test. All right, everyone having fun yet? Woo! Live coding. Okay. We're going to do myplugin.foobar. I'm passing a success handler. I'm just going to alert that thing there. And actually, I'm going to do json.stringify that argument that gets passed back. So that argument that gets passed back is probably just going to be my string. I'm hoping. I forget if it, yeah, I think it'll just be my string. Okay. So that should do it. Now the only other thing, of course, include my new JavaScript file. Put that in there. And I think that should be about it. Anything else I've forgotten, anyone? Let's try that. Yeah, in general, that should be the your workflow at any rate. Okay, so let's maybe show that on the screen. So there's my little tiny test button up there in the top corner. Something went wrong, of course. I mean, there's no way that that was going to actually work. Seriously, come on. And I can't see, where's that thing? So I do actually want to, so if I bring up DDMS, of course, this is the best way to debug a Android application. And we scroll down to the bottom of DDMS, what do we got there? Look at that, test is not defined, line 20. Perfect. So that might explain it. Hopefully it does. So function test. That looks like it's defined to me, but I probably need that. There we go. Of course it's not defined. Forgot my closing bracket. Oh, that's the, okay, there we go. And it comes back up. Hopefully I'll see an alert this time. Oh, yay, foobar, woohoo! Yeah, so, yeah, writing plugins is actually just that simple. It's like, if there's an API that you want to call and get some data back, it's so easy. So easy. And it's pretty much the exact same on every platform. So, like I said, pretty much copy that exact code onto BlackBerry, it would just work. Onto iOS, very similar, but slightly different. The JavaScript platforms obviously are going to be, you're going to have to do a JavaScript implementation rather than the native code, but otherwise it's still sort of the same for the most part. Yeah, any other questions on that? Or should I hand it over to Kevin and Don to show you an MSC plugin on Android that they recently wrote? Yeah. Cool. All right, thanks everyone.